Is my gray shirt going to mess up with the white balance in this video? It most likely will. I don't know if you remember on the previous episode, hello there, welcome back to Max's Writer's Life Vlogs, where I talk about my writing process, what I've been doing, and I also offer writing advice and inspiration along the way. As I was saying on the previous episode, last week's episode, Regaining the Inspiration to Write, I think that's what it was called. I was talking about the weather because I had an exciting week. Oof. And for the first time in ever, we had like sun in California. You may not have heard of it. Sun in California, that's unheard of. And it's just raining again, and my lighting is all screwed up, and I wanted to wear this cute white gray shirt today, and it's just screwing up everything. But anyhow, what's the format for these videos? If you're unfamiliar with me and my silly channel, my name is Kirin. I create writing content, and I analyze the storytelling of video games. This time around, I'm going to be talking about my week, and then I'm going to be going over this episode's question. Generally, I answer questions in another video, my Q&A videos, but I got a really nice question. I kind of wanted to just give it the center stage and talk about it for a little bit. What's that question? Well, we'll get to it in due time. For the time being, what was I up to this week? And the answer to that question was mostly about 101% editing. I've been working pretty much on putting the finishing touches on the upcoming release, the next volume of Mercenary Hearts, a serialized cyberpunk story by yours truly. Mercenary Hearts, link in the description down below if you want to go check it out. I'm working on the next release. It should be coming out next week, I think. From my point of view, or your point of view, don't worry about any of those things. You'll figure out. If you follow me on the channel, you'll see when the book comes out. I've been editing that. I've been working on a few things, prepping a bunch of the final release stuff. Not very exciting stuff to be talking about, just a lot of, release. These weeks are always really hectic. Thankfully now I'm working a little bit more in advance, which is good stuff. But other than that, running all over the place, editing, preparing the cover, preparing website stuffs, which reminds me, not the website stuffs, the editing stuffs. There's one editing tip that I want to remind all of you before we move forward. I talk about this all the time, but if there's one piece of advice, one piece of editing / revision knowledge I wish I had known when I was younger, when I was getting started, is this, okay? Please, for the love of all things sacred and holy in this world, read your work out loud, please. Angry Pink Yarn Yoshi. But no, seriously, read your work out loud. Like, it's one of those things that took me forever to realize, and a lot of stumbling on my work really earlier on to realize, hey, if you read your work out loud and you read it as though you're sharing the story with somebody, you can catch a lot of stiff sentences and really stiff dialogue, and also find missing words or double words or things that would get by if you're just reading it visually. But yeah, anyhow, that's what I've been up to. I've been doing a lot of editing, a lot of prepping a book release, and I also finally was convinced of downloading Neko Atsume because I have no self-control and I hate myself. And yes, Pedal Wings, you're right. Neko Atsume is ruining my life. I've only been visited once by Tubbs, and even then I was like, Tubbs, buddy, the bowl was already empty. I win, I guess. And with that very silly first segment out of the way, let's dive right into the meat and potatoes of today's episode. Generally, I get questions, I get a lot of questions, but I get some questions that are just too big for the Q&A format, just for 3 minutes of talking, and I thought, you know what, let's take one of those and give it a little bit of time in the spotlight. And today's question is about writing chronologically and also writing books in chronological order. But let's just read the question. It goes a little bit like this. What is your opinion on writing a series of books not in chronological order? I am really struggling with book 1 in my series. However, I don't know if I would be making a mistake by skipping onto the second book and writing the first one later. So let's begin the answer to this question with something that I like to call writing advice that sounds just like life advice. Dear writerly friend, I want you to consider your situation, consider what you're trying to do, and this idea of, I really just want to go and write the second book already. Is that a bad idea? I want you to consider that, and first and foremost, be honest with yourself. And I know that to some people that may sound a little bit like dismissive, but I mean it. It took me years, it took me a long time to finally be able to be honest with myself and accept what I wanted to do and just go ahead and do it. Because I'm gonna be honest with you. In my own process and in my own life, if there's something that I don't want to do, I'm always going to find excuses to not do it. Even for writing. If there's a particular chapter that I don't want to write, or it doesn't seem fun to write, I'm going to find a way. Trust me, I will find a way to not write it. So I get questions like this one, where it's like, you know, I really don't find it fun to write the first book, or it's just not exciting to me right now. Why don't I just go and start on the second book? And while other writers would probably tell you something along the lines of, well, you better start at the beginning, and you better get all that work to get to the good stuff, I'm gonna stand here as the first person in the world to tell you, why can't the second book just be the first book in the series? I know, that sounds super radical, doesn't it? Because here's the dealio, and I've always been like this. If there's something you want to write, just go ahead and write it. And if the first book doesn't seem fun to you to write, or there's nothing pulling you to write it, hey, you can have it just be backstory. Have the second book be the first book in the story. Done and done, right? It's really as simple as that. And I know somebody out there are like, but Max, you gotta introduce the characters in book 1, and I'm like, the second books in series is always also introduce characters again. You gotta reintroduce people in the books anyway. And it's like, but Max, the first book is gonna have all this world building. You can imply world building through the second book. Here's the dealio. I'm not saying that first book doesn't need to exist. But what I'm saying is that you should really be writing what excites you and what is fun. And I told you, I'm a pretty level-headed person. And if there's something I don't want to do, I'm going to find a way to not write it. There's an old quote, and I forget who said it, but the basic idea of the quote is start your story as close to the ending as possible. And people interpret this differently. I interpret that particular quote as saying that you should start as close to the most fun parts of the story as possible. And for instance, if there's a bunch of really cool things you want to do in a story, but you realize that they're happening way down the timeline, why not just start at that point in the timeline? Some of you out there may be like, yeah Max, that sounds like really cool advice, but you probably have never done this. Basically, pretty much, and I can say this with certainty, pretty much every story that I've published, the original first chapter or the original outline for the book took place way earlier, and every time I brainstorm a book, I end up pushing the start way and way and way later. Mostly to push myself closer to the most fun parts of the book. Now, I've gone on way too long on that, so I'm gonna touch very lightly on the next following section. The perils of writing out of order. Chrono-Illogically. Is that the name of this video? I hope it is, because that's a pretty clever line. So, there are a few problems that can arise from writing out of order, and the following, of course, is merely just my advice. You may be an entirely different writer, and that's okay. I can only share my point of view after all. I personally believe in writing chronologically. In my experience, has proven to be the most effective way of telling a story, mostly for one particular reason. And again, I'm super honest with myself. I know myself very well. I've been attached to this person for a long while, and I know that if I skip a part of the story, I am not going to go back to write it. If it doesn't excite me to write it right then, right at that moment, it's not going to excite me later. It's really just as simple as that. So during the act of writing, if there ever comes a scene where I'm like, oh god, this scene is not so much fun to write, I really just want to write the big bad fights, the big awesome fight scene at the end. Whenever that happens, whenever I come at a stopping point where I'm like, the next scene is not exciting, what I like to do is this, okay? There's two ways that I go about making a scene more fun to write, and it goes a little bit like this. I either A, find a way to make the scene more fun by adding or removing elements, or changing the elements of said scene, either the backstage, props that are part of the story, or characters, adding and removing characters from that scene. Find a way. If you think the scene of the character just waiting in the waiting room for the doctor to come out would be more fun if their goofy friend actually finally tagged along with them, justify that and just put him in there. Make it more fun. Find silly ways or interesting ways or dangerous ways to make otherwise unfun scenes fun. Now, the other way that I like to do this, and is basically like 70% of the time when I find a scene that is not fun to write, this is what I like to do. Find a way to relay all of that information that that scene would have given to the reader in a much more smaller space. My favorite example of this Goes a little bit like this. You have a detective, and the detective has to call the commissioner to let them know that the murderer person got away. And it's gonna be like a long and drawn out conversation because the detective is basically on their last leg and they need money, and the commissioner was like, this is your last job, detective person. And you don't really want to have that big conversation because they've already had it like 3 times in the book and it's not fun to write. So instead of writing it, find a way to relay that information that basically detective and commissioner have talked and things are not looking well for our protagonist in a smaller space, such as next scene begins and the character puts down the phone. Goofy friend turns to you and says, hey, how did the call go? The detective looks to the reader and says, it did not go very well. Done! Of course you can say it a little bit more elegantly than that, but simple as that. Wow! Isn't it awesome that we didn't have to read an entire scene of 2 characters talking the same stuff that we have already talked like twice in this story? Good riddance! I've gone a little bit long on this video, but mostly because I really wanted to relay that information. The act of writing should always be fun, and there is no shame, there is literally nothing wrong with finding ways of spinning, twisting, and changing the writing to make it as fun to you as possible. As I said a million times in the past, and I'm gonna say it one more time in this video. If you have fun writing, your readers, your audience will enjoy reading the story, so have fun. Ultimately, what are we trying to do here? What are you trying to do here, writerly friend? You're trying to create the best story possible. The best story that you can write at this very moment. And I should really be calling it an episode right now, but I'm just gonna give the disclaimer again. I have nothing against people who write out of order. I explained that I don't do it mostly because I know that if I don't write something on the spot, I'm never gonna write it. I'm never gonna go back to it, and I might as well either A, find a way to relay that information to the reader on the spot, or just find a way to make it fun. I know myself very well, and I'm the sort of person where if I don't want to do something, I'll find an excuse to not do it. It's really just as simple as that. Of course, other people have different reasons. If you would like to go into the comments down below and let me know how you write stories, whether it is chronologically or not chronologically, chrono-illogically, that's not a word. Please don't make it a word. But anyhow. This video has gone on way too long. I would like to know what you have to say, and if you have ideas, questions for future videos, please let me know in the comments down below. For the time being, I would like to know how your week has been going. Have you been writing? Have you been enjoying a little bit of reading? I am working my way through the series of unfortunate events. Been having a lot of fun. There's still like a lot of books left, but you know what? We're working our way through that. For the time being, thank you for watching. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me, and I hope to see you on the next one.